could you please pronounce your names correctly for me and give me a little bit of background about you, your profession, and sort of what brought you here?
Do you want to go first, Deborah?
No, you can go, Aline. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for pronouncing my name. So I'm Eline Goudet. I'm born and raised in France, but my mother is a Swedish-speaking Finn. And I moved to Finland 7 years ago. So I'm currently located there and working and finishing my master's studies.
Yeah, I'm Deborah Maggiolo. I come from Milan in Italy, and I'm actually studying curatorial practices and visual cultures at the Brera Academy of Fine Arts in Milan. And I am writing my MA thesis on ecologies of care. So I define myself as a researcher more than a curator, actually, because I think that curator is kind of restricting. But I am investigating what I mean by curatorial practices. So to me, is a practice of care, and I'm trying to investigate how care is conceived, like in feminist thinking, and trying to bring these philosophical views into my curatorial practices. And I'm interested in ecologies, ecology intended as a complex system. And yeah, complexity is the key term here, interconnection, and also in care and digital technology, I would say, yeah.
All right, and you all were part of a think tank entitled Post-Contemporary Divine, The Relevance of Art in a Disrupted World. So can you give me like a little non-jargony explanation of what that was all about?
Yeah, of course.
Dumb it down for me, please.
I can try maybe, if Elaine
Yeah,
is so. Yeah, okay. So basically, we were trying to understand the role of art and art practitioners, yeah, not just artists, but curators, and yeah. What can art do also for society in a world which is going to collapse, since disruption is this kind of like interruption of continuity. And so yeah, we can acknowledge like different kinds of disruption in a political, social, and environmental sphere. So we have to acknowledge that the crisis is ecological in this sense, that comprehends like different fields of life. And art can, for us, be like this marvelous ground for experimentation to deal with creative practices and to kind of let imagination thrive, to imagine new ways of coping with crisis and find new ways of living together otherwise, not following this kind of monoculture of the mind. This is a quote from Vandana Shiva. So yeah, to try to find new ways to think about life together, in even embracing this kind of trouble that is now making it difficult for life to thrive in a multi-species and ethical way. Yeah.
And do you agree with that definition?
completely, yeah. So we've approached a few different strands of research. We've looked into matters of transparency, accessibility, but also inclusion in the arts, and what those mean exactly, and how they can be approached, and what kind of solutions we can try to find as a group in order to sort of address these issues, and come up with more sustainable ways to expand the arts sector generally.
So within this idea of all these different problems and disruptions and stuff, like, could you give me like a specific example of what you mean by a disruption or a problem or a, environmental issue that can or should be using art in some way?
Yeah, maybe I have an example. I work with my cultural association. I'm a co-founder of this cultural association, which has worked with the urban landscape and the urban communities in Milan. And this was a project about sustainability of food and art intertwined with ecological issues and practices that could maybe find ways to to promote this vision of interconnectedness among beings, human and more than humans, and we try to work with communities, to take communities to the outskirts of the city. So we try to bring art to the outskirts in order to create participative actions that could foster this new relationship of citizens with the outskirts and with this particular reality, which is an agricultural kind of cooperative and cultural association, which is trying to work in this beautiful, I think they have this beautiful metaphor, which is like to recreate the complexity of a forest. So acknowledging the importance of diversity in society and in agriculture. And I think that this can be like a perfect place for art to experiment outside of white cubes. So focusing on practices more than on aesthetics and trying to really find ways to make a change for the whole society and dealing with communities and with marginalized people.
Well, for instance, and I failed to mention that earlier, but I'm currently completing my master's degree in Vikka at Aalto University in Finland, which stands for Visual Culture, Curating and Contemporary Art. So the program itself is very oriented towards this idea of multidisciplinarity, and we're highly encouraged to, for instance, take courses from different programs. And I've been working on the interlap of art, ecology, and sciences. And I'm also very interested in looking into this idea of communality and site-specific actions and interventions, and what can art do for smaller communities. And for instance, my family has roots that go way back to the 1600s in Western Finland on the west coast. And I've been working on a collaborative project with a friend from the university, through which we're hoping to address certain questions of ecological resilience within the community itself. For instance, how have they been affected by recent climate changes? For instance, rising levels of temperatures. How have those been felt and experienced by the community, and also within the forestry industry, which is quite a major player on within Finland, and how these changes have affected it as an industry, but also in its capacity to be more sustainable and to survive, quite simply, in the face of certain changes. And if we're talking about if we're talking about rising levels of temperature, these have had a very concrete incidence on the health of forests, on certain ecosystems, and they have, for instance, encouraged the rapid development of certain tree-eating insects, which have completely devastated certain regions in Sweden, for instance. But this has started happening in southern Finland as well, and it's only going to get worse if we don't do anything. So this is where art can come in and play a role, and we can use the tools which are at our dispositions, such as how can we activate a sense of belonging and a sense of recapturing our own narrative through art, through envisioning, and through imagining better futures, as Deborah mentioned earlier.
Well, and I've been hearing a lot about this whole sort of like art and working together for ecological purposes. And I keep wondering, I'm like, how can that sort of manifest itself? Like, because I can see the theory that that artists have a great strong interest in, let's say, global warming. Generally, artists are all liberals, and we believe in this, and we believe in trying to do something to stop it. But like, my question would be, and this is probably coming from a position of ignorance, is what role can artists actually play to help this?
I personally, judging from my own practice, I truly believe that art can act as, first of all, a boundary spanner, which is a bridge builder between certain societal and ecological issues and the society that is being affected by them. And as a second point, I, I know it can come from perhaps a romantic mindset, but at the same time, I do see a sort of transcendental quality to art and how it can transcend certain moments in time and transcend history and connect us through a wider timeline.
I love a good romantic idea. It's great.
And I'm not an artist, but I think that maybe one such important thing is like to help people to really imagine new possibilities. Yeah, we are in a current famine of imagination, so we really need to be in touch with new possible imaginaries. And for instance, an artist with whom I collaborate wrote a beautiful science fiction, it's not a novel, a beautiful science fiction story. And I think that even if fiction in some ways it can connect the present way of being to a kind of future, not utopia. I think that the term utopia maybe is something that is a bit too abstract, and we can understand the artistic practice like a process. So like translate this image into motion, so imagination in this sense. uh, but it's in Italian, so I don't. Okay, sorry about this. I'm a bit tired. A bit like I.
Maybe I can pick up from here just for a little bit, because we've been talking a lot about creativity in the everyday in our think tank, and creativity as an everyday practice. And I'm also very encouraging, or I find it very encouraging that the social arts in particular and can sort of reactivate a sense of people's own creative agency of what they can do, and perhaps allow them to tap into this speculative imagination, as Deborah mentioned, and find new and innovative ways to think about current problems and perhaps also to consider the future and better ways to live together. And I think to some extent that also applies to or multi-species relationships, how we're living with non-humans. And I'm personally very interested as well in matters of care and how we can extend our own human sense of care to others, non-humans, and the bodies, such as bodies of water, such as forests. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
There's probably too much to unpack there for this podcast, so we'll just sort of move forward with this. So the outcome of this, so you have now, this is the ending of the event, and you all have, I assume at this point, come up with like proposals or things that you would like to do moving forward, or things that you would like to encourage. So like, what are some of the outcomes of this Destructura forum?
Okay, we actually want to elaborate more on this disruption and what art can do in time of crisis.
I love it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are actually trying to gather together and kind of finding a collective that can maybe investigate on these themes for a long time after the forum, who was the perfect occasion for sharing ideas and coming together to find that we had so many shared interests and we are probably going to address this kind of collaborative interspecies practices in the project that we are presenting tomorrow. I don't know if we can spoiler on something. I don't know. And me and Aline are working together in this group. So let's stay tuned. I don't know. We can spoiler something, Aline?
Maybe a little bit.
This podcast will not be published for at least a month, so you're not spoiling anything.
We are working with more than human, and in this sense we are trying to thinking about climate change and about how temperature are even rising and rising every day. We kind of want to focus on what we are going to miss. So we are used to maybe think about animals extinctions, but we are not maybe accustomed to think about this more than human elemental extinction. So maybe working on how winter will never be the same now, and also all these bodies of water like glaciers, lakes, and everything connected to water is going to be drier and drier. So we wanted to reflect on how to mourn for the more than human, and how to try to think as a more than human kind of identity, and what we can do to really we can say create rituals in order to acknowledge this extinction and take it as a new starting point to really understand how to live differently in more ethical ways, and try to work with local communities from which these bodies of water are important, and trying to understand their stories and share new ways of telling stories about this more than human interspecies world. Yeah, something like this.
And on that note, I could maybe add on that by also really pointing out how important this sense of locality is to us, and this idea of working very closely with a certain community, preferably on in peripheral areas, not in urban centers, because we're very aware that people who live outside of the city have a strong sense of belonging to the land, but climate change as a major event is so complex. It's such a complex system that it becomes too hard to grasp in its entirety. And how can we address that as a community? How can we sort of rebuild our sense of understanding of what is going on, and of making meaning of what is going on, without sort of losing our mind altogether? And in that regard, I think a lot of what is happening right now is this collapse of compassion, the sense that there's just so much happening that we can't take any more of it in the face of such disastrous changes. So how can we address that, and how can we address it through art and through artistic interventions? And so that's what we're hoping to do through our collaborative work, which extends beyond the collective itself to non-humans, as Deborah said.
All right, and so moving forward, as you know, you have now sort of touched on your collective that you want to create. What other sort of recommendations or ideas do you have for the sort of the future of this issue?
Of this issue about climate change and environmental issue, you're pointing to this?
Well, you've brought up so many issues. Sure, you can take those.
We still don't know. Maybe I still don't know. Maybe let's try and focus on this project, and we would really like to try to foster research, because for instance in Italy is not that much a thing. I think working on ecological oriented practices, and also like in the academic world, is not such a thing to to have ecology as a class. So maybe trying to I don't know how to put this. Trying to to bring this kind of research, this kind of themes at the center of the academic life, in order to try to also we as a creative practitioner being able to kind of to kind of connect with people and try to bring to people new visions. And I really don't know what to say.
I think I also think that the general consensus within our think tank was that it's really hard to come up with concrete examples of
Solutions, yeah.
things that can be done. But what I'm getting to is that, and this was raised during the General Assembly, the fact that it's very hard to come up with very concrete solutions to how on how to develop the role of creative practitioners within societal issues if you're not completely agreed on what an artist really is and on what art is and what it can do. So I think that's been a core issue within the debates we've been having, and on simply how to frame or position as creative practitioners and how to justify or existence really, and what we do and what we can offer to society.
Well, those are great questions. Okay, wait, I want to take a step back. You said defining what an artist is. What did you come up with for a definition for that?
We haven't come up with anything so far because it's so broad.
It's as complex to unpack as climate change.
Yeah. And I think because we're seeing a wind of change towards cross-pollination within the arts and cultural sector, that makes it all the more difficult to pinpoint what art really is, because no one can seem to come to an understanding about what it actually is. And now that we're having now that we're seeing collaborations between artists and scientists, perhaps suddenly scientists are going to start thinking that, hey, maybe I'm an artist as well.
Lots of scientists are artists, so I don't understand why there's necessarily this need to divide these things. But, everybody likes to pigeonhole people.
And then maybe like I see that most of the times art is like just understood from people outside of these fields as kind of decoration, as a kind of just cultural heritage and something like to preserve, and not something that can actually be like a practice, to a thinking practice together. It's like a way of thinking and of doing things, a form of knowledge that you can apply to everyday thing, and maybe try to think through the lens of art. It's a kind of, to me, concrete way to do philosophy also. I don't know then if everyone's agree, but I think that can be also thought of like this maybe.
Yeah, and I think to some extent it also affected the perception of or our role within destructura, because uh, we have a certain mindset and we have a certain approach to work, which is very sort of on a case-to-case basis, and we found that this led to some extent to a certain degree of conflict within the structure of destructura, and how we could evolve and develop our proposals within those parameters as creative practitioners without feeling stifled by certain guidelines and certain ways of doing things, which were largely inspired by some of the core members' previous experience within the European Youth Parliament. And it's a completely different way to approach things, which a lot of us weren't necessarily used to. And we had to find a sort of common understanding as to how to approach this process.
All right. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit lost at this moment.
It's a good thing or it's a bad thing?
Well, it's a bad thing considering I'm supposed to be running this podcast. But so in the end, at this exact moment, at the end of this, like some of the other think tanks all sort of came out with recommendations and proposals and things to move forward. And it sounds like not quite as concrete with your outcomes at this point.
The outcome of our work is relatively concrete in the sense that we have proposals, we have suggestions which can be addressed to different institutions and governmental bodies across Europe. But at the same time, we maybe what didn't come out clearly earlier is the fact that we still feel like there's much more to be done, and that we still need to clarify a lot of points and clarify our position on the European art scene.
Yeah, we will need more time to elaborate on this because we just have few days, and we are thinking about very complex system, and we don't want like to say, okay, we come with a solution and that is done. But we really need to explore this complexity more, also to learn more about ourselves, in order to then really do propose practices that can maybe lead to a change, artistic practices that can really respond to this crisis.
Okay, and a phrase that was used in the description of the think tank actually was, "What's the potential of art to prevent disruptions from affecting Europe?" What exactly does that mean? Like, how do you see the role of art in preventing disruptions?
Well, I think first of all, we had some trouble addressing the definition of disruption, of the word disruption itself.
Legitimate, yeah.
Yeah, because we we realized that it has both a positive and a negative connotation, in the sense that a disruption can be perceived as a shock of a really wide amplitude, but it can also be an action which can subvert a certain system or a certain set of rules. And I think that's that's what we've been working with.
To try to think about trouble as something that makes it possible for new alliance and new patterns and new relationship to thrive on this. There is this beautiful term from this anthropologist who is Anna Singh, and she speaks about disturbance, and she says that in an ecological system, disturbance is something that is already implied into ecological systems, but this disturbance can change patterns and allow for new alliance to burn. So we can see disruption as a sort of tool. Like now we have the possibility in this kind of mess that we are into to really try to intertwine ropes in a different way and try to write down a different story. And we also acknowledge this positive kind of potentiality into disruption. It's like a rupture of the canon. Also, we also spoke about this, the rupture of the canonical way of doing things. The emergence of new possibilities different from the norm to emerge.
It sounds like you ran into one of my biggest pet peeves in the arts industry, which is the finding a common vernacular. How difficult it is when you're writing grants, proposals, artist statements, whatever, to find words that translate well. And I don't mean translate between languages. I mean just like from an idea to another person who is reading it or listening to it. A common vernacular is something that kind of drives me nuts because it doesn't exist in the arts world.
No, it doesn't exist, and it's but that's also where the artist, or perhaps the creative practitioner in general has a role to play. And like I mentioned earlier, there is this concept of the boundary spanner of being able to build bridges. It can be between communities, between political entities, but it can also be between different forms of knowledge and different forms of addressing knowledge. And one thing we did approach during our conversations was this sort of discrepancy between the scientific research and results that are being produced in regards to climate change, of course, amongst other issues, and how these are very formalized ways of thinking and of producing knowledge, which aren't necessarily accessible to everybody. And in that regard, that is where art can step in and perhaps facilitate a certain accessibility to that knowledge by using the tools that are in our hands and our visual skills and our multisensorial skills and or perhaps our sense of care and or sensibility and perceptivity to the world that surrounds us.
All right. Is there anything last little bit you want to throw in before we wrap up?
The seagull is trying to add something.
It gives character. It's fine. It tells the listener.
We are into this multi-species ecology.
Yes.
And so we acknowledge the seagull as well.
In a port city in Tallinn, Estonia.
Yeah, I think that the city is stepping in and doing an intervention during this podcast.
It's a performance.
Fabulous. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks to you.
Before you leave, I'd like to say thank you for listening all the way to the end of the conversation. We appreciate it, and we would love it if you would share the podcast with your friends, your family, your coworkers, your studio mates, anybody with an interest in the arts and creative endeavors. The building and strengthening of the arts and creative community, not only today, but in the future, is at the core of our mission for this podcast. They can listen and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are produced by 5014, and the music was created by Pete Bybee. The Wise Fool Art Podcast is supported in part by an EEA grant from Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway in an effort to work together for a green, competitive, and inclusive Europe. We would also like to thank our partners Hunt Kastner in Prague, Czech Republic, and Kunstsentrene i Norge in Norway. Links to EEA grants and our partner organizations are available in the show notes or on our website, wisefoolpod.com.